From Music City, USA, it's David Hooper and Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host. With me today, Norbert Putnam. He's a record producer and musician that really understates, though, his big impact and contributions to the history of music. He's been on over 10,000 records, working with artists like Elvis Presley, Roy Orbison, Henry Mancini, Linda Ronstadt, and others. Norbert, welcome to Music Business Radio.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So, Forbes recently came out with a list of the number one moneymaker for an American song ever. And it was Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville.
That's correct.
You produced it.
I did. I was there.
So we're gonna get the story behind that later on in the show. First of all, let's talk about how you started Muscle Shoals rhythm section.
Well, you know, this is really bizarre. I became a musician because of Elvis Presley, okay? I never wanted to be a musician. My father wanted me to be an insurance guy. I was going to get an MBA. We were going to go in the insurance agency. But some kids in my neighborhood were putting together a band to do early Son Elvis, you know, That's All Right Mama and all this stuff. And one of them remembered that my father had an acoustic bass because he played in some country bands. So they came up to me and said, look, you're the bass player. No one else in school has one. And so I said to Danny Cross, I said, well, Danny, what makes you think overnight I'm going to be able to learn to play this thing well enough to be in your band? He said, well, Norbert, this Elvis stuff only has 3 chords. Surely you can find 3 notes on that thing. Well, that sounded like a reasonable, you know. And so I would come home from school, and my father showed me how to tune it up. He said, I don't want you doing this. You can't make any money. You'll never make any money. Come with me in the insurance business. You don't want to do this. I'll show you how to tune it. So I'm in there beating the bass every day with Scotty and Bill. Boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom. And I got blisters all over my head. To make a long story short, we start to play for high school hops, and everybody jumps up and down. The greatest thing, though, were the girls who never looked at me before were starting to kind of look at me.
That's how basses work.
I'm thinking, you know, I think I want to, I'm digging this music thing, you know. So, but you know what's really, really odd, David? I was 15 years old. 13 years go by. At this point, I'm an actual musician, okay? I've made hits in Muscle Shoals. When I was 19, we started the Muscle Shoals industry with Arthur Alexander and the Tams, and we opened for the Beatles in 64, right? And we came to Nashville in 65. 1970, 13 years later, I'm in the studio with Elvis Presley, the real guy that I used to go boom chicka boom with, you know? And it was a miracle. It's an absolute miracle.
I want to break down what you just said in about one sentence because there's some stories there. One, you're making hits in Muscle Shoals. Can you talk about working down there in Fame Studios? In Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Did you know you were making hits? And talk about some of the stories you've got from down there.
Well, when I was about 16, we had this little R&B band with Jerry Kerrigan, and we were playing fraternity parties around the South at Ole Miss, Auburn, Alabama. But a local entrepreneur named Tom Stafford. Tom was the manager of the Princess Theater, okay? And he was obviously delusional because Tom had said to us, we came out of the movies one night at the age of 16, and Tom approached David Briggs and I, and he said, look, I want you guys to come and play on demos at my new music publishing company. And we said, well, can you pay us anything? Well, no, but I can get you into the movies for free. Well, that seemed like a reasonable offer. So we started hanging out with Tom up over his father's drugstore. And Tom was saying, he kept saying, you know, we can have a major music scene down here in Muscle Shoals. And we thought, this guy's nuts, you know, little tiny town, right? But he kept preaching it, and pretty soon people started coming up the stairs, songwriters. A guy named Arthur Alexander comes up the steps. Arthur's the bellhop at the Sheffield Hotel. Handsome-looking guy, looked like Harry Belafonte, about 6'2", okay? Arthur comes in, and he's got a bunch of poems. He doesn't play an instrument. I remember David Briggs going out to the piano with Arthur, and Arthur would start singing, and David would try to find the chords to match the harmonies, okay? And Arthur would be singing, and he'd say, yeah, no, that's the wrong chords. Back up. And he's singing, no, that's the right chord. And David, it'd take him 2 hours, and David would get all the chords worked out. And then we would go out there, Kerrigan would play drums, I'd play bass, and we had to learn how to manufacture an original bass part. You know, when I was in a garage band, I would copy it off the record. And suddenly I had to play a part that might match Arthur's voice. Well, an entrepreneur named Rick Hall, a couple of years later, grabs Arthur Alexander, gets an old abandoned warehouse over in Muscle Shoals City, walls off a control room. We went in there, and in a day and a half, we did 3 sides with Arthur, okay? We did You Better Move On, Get a Shot of Rhythm and Blues, and Sally Sue Brown, I think it was. Rick Hall gets in his car, drives to Nashville, runs the tape around to Orrin Bradley, Chet Atkins. They go, this isn't country, this is pop R&B. Finally finds Noel Ball, who's a disc jockey. And Noel is a WSX disc jockey, good buddies with Dot Records. Makes a deal. 2 months later, Arthur Alexander is in the top 20 in America. We're putting him on a plane here in Nashville to fly to Philadelphia to do the Dick Clark show. That's network all over the country. Black and white, but it's network, you know. That's how Muscle Shoals began.
Well, let's play that track right now. This is You Better Move On by Arthur Alexander on Music Business Radio.
You asked me to give up the hand of the girl I love. You tell me I'm not the man she's worthy of. But who are you to tell her who to love? That's up to her. Yes, and the Lord above. You better move on.
You Better Move On, Arthur Alexander. So that was the start of Muscle Shoals, and you sold a lot of records. Dick Clark could move a lot of records back then.
Oh, yeah, Arthur's records sold, I think, 700,000 singles. Rick Hall, the producer, made about $35,000, $40,000, which is a huge amount in 1961. And he built the present famed studios that you can still see down there. Okay. By the way, it's a new movie called Muscle Shoals, and it's a documentary, and it covers most of this music I'm talking about.
That's good, because you've got so much that I don't want to gloss over that. That's important stuff. But you also said something a minute ago about opening up for the Beatles. And that's kind of a cool story.
Oh, the Beatles. Oh, of course. We get the first hit with Arthur, and the big deal was to get a second hit. And Bill Lowry brings up the Tams from Atlanta. What kind of fool do you think I am? Great record. Okay. So we were sort of validated. And then Tommy Rowe comes in. And Tommy Rowe is the bubblegummer, the Sheila. He was kind of a Buddy Holly copycat. But he's a big star in Europe, and he goes to Europe, and 63, he's got a #1 record over there. A young band in Germany is hired to open for him. Tommy comes back, and he's got a tape in his hand. And he's coming into Fame Studios. We're going to make another record, but he said, before we start, Felton Jarvis, Felton was his producer, who, by the way, later produces Presley. He says, Felton, I've got a tape, and you need to hear this band. He says, they have something. Great charisma. I could hardly go on. I've got #1 hits all over Germany. These guys are just a cover band. They do twist and shout. They do dance things. And Felton said, well, what's on the tape? Okay, it's not the band. It's just this kid, Paul, there in a hotel room with one mic, and he's going to play the guitar. And he's going to sing this song they've written. And then there's 2 other guys, this guy, George and John, are going to join in on harmony. So it starts, okay? Now, years later, I'm telling the same story to George Harrison. We've become friends, and I'm working at his house in Hindley. I said, George, now, the tape starts playing, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's time to start the session. But the first thing we notice, as the rhythm guitar starts, the B string is flat. Oh, the kid can't tune his guitar. Okay, one demerit. And then this kid, Paul, starts singing. Changes are commonplace, trite. They're almost Righteous Brothers changes, or Isley Brother changes, 1 6 minor 4 5, 1 6 minor 4 5. And then the lyric is really trite. I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your... And we think he wants to hold her hand. What kind of guy is this? You know what I'm saying? Well, it gets into the chorus, and the 2 harmony voices come in. They're so out of tune, okay, that Rick Hall reaches over to the Ampex and just stops the tape. And Felton said, now, Tommy, we're behind here. We've got a lot of work to do. I don't know what you've been smoking, but I don't think so, son. Now, let's go to and we went right into the first song. So that's the end of the Beatles. Right? Tommy comes back the next year, and he walks into Fame Studios with his chest all stuck out, and he goes, well, you remember that band last year? And we all go, what band? We remember any band. That Beatles band. You remember I said Beatles? Oh, those guys. They got a record deal. You're kidding. They got a record? Oh, not only did they get a record deal, the record's it'll be #1 in England next week. They're coming here in 2 months. They're going to do the Ed Sullivan Show. Oh, then they're doing a concert in Washington. They want to know if you guys would be the backup band for the 6 opening acts. And we said, they got a record deal? He couldn't tune his guitar. They couldn't sing. They were looking at each other. And Kerrigan, who was always the accountant in the group, goes, well, what are they paying, Kerrigan says, okay? Well, it turned out they were paying more money than God. I mean, it was like $1,000 a piece or something. So we go, oh, we'd love to do it. So we flew up to Washington a few months later. And on the plane up, we were so excited. We were sitting back there in the tail of this Lockheed Electra. We're 22 now, we can have a cocktail. And I think David Briggs says, a toast tonight, we will be playing with the Righteous Brothers. Oh, God. And I said, and George is sitting there. He said, Norbert, if I'd been in your band and I'd realized that I could play with the Righteous Brothers, I'd been right with you. He said, they were the best, We did You've Lost That Loving Feeling, You never rise anymore. So that's my Beatles story. Later on, I worked with George.
Well, I've got some questions about that, certainly about your time with Elvis. Norbert Putnam is my guest today. He's got a new book. It's called Music Lessons, about his stories and impact and contributions to the history of music. He's played on over 10,000 records. When we come back, more from Norbert Putnam on Music Business Radio.
Hi, this is Lisa Marie Presley, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
Lightning 100 presents Brandi Carlile. Returning for one night only to perform with the Nashville Symphony, April 22nd at Schermerhorn Symphony Center. Tickets go on sale Friday at 10 a.m. by phone at 615-687-6400, online at nashvillesymphony.org, or at the Schermerhorn Symphony Center. Brandi Carlile with the Nashville Symphony, April 22nd.
Experience the music of Pink Floyd like never before, performed by the Nashville Symphony and accompanied by a mind-blowing light show. June 3rd at Schermerhorn Symphony Center. Hear your favorite songs from one of the biggest rock bands of all time. Tickets on sale this Friday at 10 a.m. by phone at 615-687-6400, online at nashvillesymphony.org, and in person at Schermerhorn Symphony Center.
Hi, this is Buzz Cason, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, and I'm the guy who co-wrote the song that got played 6 million times on radio. And in the true hillbilly fashion, I spent it all.
Welcome back to Music Business Radio.
From Music City, USA, Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio. I'm David Hooper, your host, and with me today, Norbert Putnam. He's a record producer and musician. He's been on over 10,000 records, had a big impact and contribution to the history of music. You opened up for the Beatles. What everybody wants to know is, how'd you get a gig like that?
Well, the Beatles had all of these recordings that we'd made in Muscle Shoals. And Brian Epstein had a record store in Liverpool, I'm told. And he would bring these obscure American recordings to the Beatles. And John Lennon supposedly fell in love with the B-side of Arthur's You Better Move On. And that song was called Need a Shot of Rhythm and Blues or Get a Shot of... And he learned that, and they added it to the Beatles' repertoire, okay? And as a matter of fact, George said to me that he used to spend hours, Lennon would spend hours singing with Arthur, trying to make those sounds and imitate that voice, you see. The English, were very enthralled with American music, and especially soul music, black music.
So Americans very enthralled with the Beatles as well. And one of the things that we hear on Music Business Radio all the time is, I started my career when I saw them on The Sullivan Show. So I'd love to know what your reaction to the Ed Sullivan performance was.
We thought they were awful. I'll be honest with you. Well, first of all...
You're the first guy in history to ever say that, you realize.
Well, let's see. We're in Muscle Shoals. We're making R&B records with soulful black people, and black people invented soul. Come on, we all know that, okay? And so here come the Beatles, and with great fanfare, okay? And I think we expected a little... Oh, they're doing Twist and Shout. Well, let me tell you, this is not the Isley Brothers, okay?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's almost like, you talked about Dot Records, like Pat Boone had the records, he would strip it out of the soul.
He's doing Tutti Frutti. Well, we had black and white radio, and of course, I suppose a lot of white people never had a chance to hear Little Richard and those guys, But when we heard them do Twist and Shout, it was like, these guys have a lot of work to do. And I said that to George, and George said, well, Norbert, he said, we were down there in Liverpool, and when we do Twist and Shout, we actually thought that we were as good as the Isley Brothers. He said, but looking back now, I can see, George was great. I love George Harrison.
The audience, though, there's no denying. You see women fainting and just going crazy. And when you actually opened up for them, did they give you that same reaction?
Oh, it was bigger than that. So we fly up to Washington. The concert's going to be at, I think it was called the Washington Arena in those days. It was basically a big basketball gymnasium. And the stage that night was a boxing platform. So it was in the round, okay? And I remember we had all of our instruments set up on the floor. And the sound system was only capable of reproducing the vocals. So we came out, and we had 3 or 4 acts. Tommy Rowe was there. I've forgotten who the others were, but the Righteous Brothers closed out the first half. And guess what? These kids are paying no mind to our great Righteous Brothers. They're all fidgeting around like, when are the Beatles getting here? When are the Beatles? And we're thinking, these little jerks, these are the greatest acts in America, you know. But I think they were selling jelly beans that night in Coca-Cola. So a little bit of caffeine, a little bit of sugar was going along. By the time the Beatles were coming out, oh, by the way, it took a wedge of about 20 policemen to take us out because there was no stage entrance.
Yeah, that sounds dangerous.
And the cop came over and said, David Briggs and I were playing with some little 8mm Brownie cameras, silent cameras. And we wanted to shoot some film. The cop said, well, I can't come back for you. Get down on your knees. You're going to have to stay here until it's over, okay? And so I can reach up and touch the the mic stand for McCartney, okay? And there's John Lennon. And we're shooting film of them, okay? But when they come out, the place erupts. These kids are screaming. And they start singing. The kids don't stop screaming. Not only that, they've got hands full of jelly beans, and they start pelting. And if you look at the film of this concert, and I'm sure you've probably seen, you'll see them, they're ducking, McCartney's ducking jelly beans as he tries to do his vocal.
And that was you on the camera.
Well, you can see David and I milling around down there. Matter of fact, the only color film shot that night was by David Briggs and I. If you look at the Beatles anthology, the producer got a hold of some of my color film and cut it in with his black and white. And it's kind of cool, you know. But I have to tell you something. I was made a believer. When they came out and struck the first chord, it was like that Maxell tape ad. They were twice as loud as our American amps, those big Vox amps. And when Ringo, when he hit the snare, he had sticks that were a half-inch in diameter, and he came off his seat. He hit it so hard, okay? They were the first loud rock and roll band. And by the time they finished their little 32-minute bit, Briggs and I were going, well, maybe we were a bit rough on these boys. You know, they may have some after all.
They won you over. You're listening to Music Business Radio. You're backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host. And with me today, Norbert Putnam. He's a record producer and musician, but really more than that. He's played on over 10,000 records. We've been talking about the Beatles and his experience working with them. But also another music icon, an American icon, Elvis Presley. Did a lot of work with Elvis. I'd love to know what your perception of him was the first time you saw him.
Well, there were 2 artists that I played with in my career that I would place at the top of the mountain and everyone else down in the valley. And it was Elvis Presley and Ray Charles. They were the 2 greatest purveyors of emotion. You know, people buy music not particularly because of what the lyric says or what the band plays. It's the timbre of the voice and the sounds the singer makes. It's his breathing, you know. It's his screaming, his shouting, and his dropping down. And Presley and Ray Charles had the greatest command of that range of sounds. You know, Elvis heard a young singer named Roy Hamilton back in the mid-'50s. And Roy had a lot of big #1 black records. And Roy, and Elvis went, I'll just take that and put that in my baritone, you know. So Elvis would borrow these little things from different people. And he had the ability, he had the voice, and he could do that. Ray Charles was capable of actually, I've got a record of Ray singing Old Man River from a Broadway play. That Old Man River, at the very end, you can hear Ray break down. As it's fading out, he's sobbing into the microphone. So these people were not afraid. They were totally uninhibited. They were able to turn it on and give you that emotion. When that red light came on, it went onto the tape. You know, we call normal people civilians. If you're not in the music industry, you're a civilian. When they would hear those sounds, they had to buy that music. It was like another language. And it was the sounds that the human voice can make, from joy to great drama. And Elvis and Ray did that better than anyone I ever knew.
Well, speaking of the red light, the recording light we're talking about, it makes a lot of people nervous. By the time you were recording with Elvis, you had recorded a lot of records, a lot of songs.
Oh, yeah.
Did you get nervous? I mean, it's the biggest guy in the world that you're recording with. It's your idol that you had tried to copy, really, when you were at the garage band. So did that make you nervous? Does anything in the studio make you nervous?
Well, at that point, I didn't think anything was making me nervous because I'd been in the studio for 10 years, right? And I've played with all kinds of people. One of the things I like to mention is Nashville in those days was a very, very broad recording center. Perry Como would come down and record. Henry Mancini, the great film score guys, coming in, and we're making records. And Al Hurt, the great trumpet player from New Orleans. And then the folkies came in, Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Stephen Stills, Joe Walsh and the James Gang, and Neil Young are at my studio. David Briggs and I built a studio in 1970. And it was a wonderful time to be a musician, okay? Because in the day's time, I could go from doing orchestral work with Henry Mancini to working with Tony Joe White or J.J. Cale. So by 1970, when I meet Presley, I've just produced a hit record on Joan Baez, and I'm thinking about hanging up my bass playing shoes, okay? Why? Producers get royalties for perpetuity, okay? Yeah. And I've just produced The Night That Drove Old Dixie Down, and Clive Davis is just giving me Young Dan Fogelberg, so I'm not going to play so much. When Felton Jarvis says, you need to come and play for the King, I said, well, is this a summons? Because yes, the King wants you there. Well, and you ask, was I a little nervous? I went down to RCA studio that week at 6 o'clock, and I tried to imagine what would happen when he came in. I couldn't help thinking about it because I'd seen those movies. You know, the early movies, King Creole I thought was great, didn't you? The guy could obviously act, but then he gets into doing these one-off films. But I thought, I'm going to be okay. I remember going into the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and I said, dear God, I would appreciate it if you would sort of watch after my fingertips tonight, guide me to all the right notes. Don't allow me to be the first guy to screw up a Presley session, you know. And so I was a little intimidated. And when he came in, I was totally intimidated. Why? Elvis Presley comes striding into RCA studios, and he has a cape, a black cape on, like King Leopold of Bavaria, King Ludwig of Bavaria. And he's got a walking cane, a silver-crested lion's head walking cane with ruby red eyes. And he pitches that off to one of the Memphis Mafia guys. He catches it in midair, and then he twirls the cape around, and someone else catches that. And then he did a very interesting thing. I was sort of standing back at this point, right? He spread his arms wide and beckoned to all the players. Guys, come here. Now, I was the only new guy. They rush him, and it's like a football huddle. They're all hugging each other, and Elvis is saying, do I have some stories to tell you? You won't believe what happened to Elvis in the last 3 months. He would talk about himself in the third person, you know. And Felton Jarvis says, Elvis, got that kid from Muscle Shoals, Putnam, you know. Oh, Put, yes, Put, you're Put, great. Well, come on over. And for 2 hours, he regaled us with story after story. And we laughed. And it was very interesting. No other artist had ever taken any time. Because when that clock started to roll, the money's rolling, you see. And it's 8 o'clock, and the session started at 6. Well, Elvis entertains us until 10. So we've made one session with an hour overtime. Okay?
Right.
And Felton Jarvis, but you know what he was doing? He was a master, I think, of reading people. He wanted to get us all calm. Yeah. And he was telling stories, and it sounded like the sort of stuff we would talk about with our high school buddies. You know, from Florence to Tupelo is only 50 or 60 miles.
Yeah.
He was very much like the kids I went to school with. He loved girls and cars and cheeseburgers, okay? And so by the time we started to record, I'm thinking, hey, it's a pretty good guy. I don't need to worry about anything. Huh?
From people that I know that have known him or knew him, I got that sense on one hand, there's this hugely charismatic front man, but on the other hand, it's like it was just a kid. There used to be stories of him going to these theaters and renting out the entire theaters and making them watch the same scene like over and over again before we had like a rewind button. And it's like, wow, this guy's just a big kid.
Elvis Presley was a very intelligent man. You know, I spoke to you about the way he sort of swiped that lower register thing from Roy Hamilton. He was constantly studying music. He knew all the great black records, all the great white records, all the great gospel singers. And he took bits and pieces out of it and made his own voice, okay? And, you know, his hair was actually sort of an auburn. It had a bit of red in it But he sees Marlon Brando on the Wild Bunch, and he goes, I need to be black with sideburns, black hair with sideburns, and a leather jacket. He invented Elvis Presley, and I think that's the reason he could talk about him in the third person. One night at Stack's, 1973, Christmas time, I ended up having lunch with him. Now, the King, by 1973, is totally nocturnal. He gets up at 5 in the afternoon, has his breakfast at 6, and begins his day at 8 in the evening. So he's 8 hours off. But we'd always break at midnight for lunch, okay? It's his lunch, okay? And this one night at Stack's, I find a drum riser in the back, and I've got my food, and I'm over there, and I look up, and here comes the King. Hey, Put, can I join you? Yeah, climb up here. Over in the corner is the rest of the band with Felton Jarvis and Lamar Fife, and they're telling funny stories. So we sat there and we talk. I tell him the story. He said, how'd you get started? I said, well, there's this kid at school who was doing your music. My father had an acoustic bass, and he said that only needed 3 notes to be in his band, you know. And then Presley goes, well, you're damn well lucky. I was a Sinatra. He never found the bass part. We laughed. So we're sitting, but you know, we're sitting there talking, and we're talking in a very soft voice, sort of the way I am now. And Elvis was sort of down here. And we talked about our families, and he said, you know, Put, I want to go to England. Wembley Stadium has just offered me $1 million. And Colonel Tom won't go. And I don't understand this. He says the reason my records do so well in Europe is they never see me. Does that make any sense to you? Well, do you think I want to get involved between Colonel Tom and
yeah.
I said, well, Elvis, I can tell you this. Your record's prominently displayed in all the shops over there, and you're on the radio all the time over there. I said, I can't tell you whether or not to go, but I think you should check it out, you know. And we continue to talk, and he looks up at the clock. It's 1 o'clock, and he's still talking in this soft voice. He says, hey, Put, come on, it's time for me to go be Elvis. And he stands up, and he drew himself up, okay? And he lowered his voice. Fellas, he calls across. Fellas, we need to get 3 more sides tonight. And he gets way down here. He became Elvis, you see.
Turned it on. You got some great stories. When we come back, we're going to dig into them. I'm going to let you kind of take the reign of the show because we haven't even talked about Jimmy Buffett and Margaritaville yet. #1 money-making American-produced song
Who's
in history.
Jimmy Buffett? Do you know who's Jimmy? What's he talking about?
That guy? Clive Davis stories, Dan Fogelberg, Joan Baez. Norbert Putnam is my guest today. He's a record producer and musician. He's played on over 10,000 records, been a part of some of the biggest albums in history. More from Norbert when we come back on Music Business Radio.
Now I'm smoking in the Texas with a hammer down and a rockin' little combo from the guitar town.
This is Emmylou Harris, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
Come celebrate the grand opening of Nashville's newest hang, 2 Bits with Lightning 100, this Thursday, January 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. Enjoy the unique and eclectic menu created by renowned chef Will Zuckman. Also, 24 locally sourced craft beers and house-made cocktails. Oh, and 2 Bits features a selection of vintage arcade games, always on free play. Sit in one of the custom booths and battle it out with your friends on a PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo, Sega, or Atari. Check out Demumbrian's newest restaurant and bar, 2 Bits, for their grand opening celebration, January 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. Next to the Green Room and Tin Roof, Lightning 100 will be there broadcasting live from 5 to 7 p.m. this Thursday. We'll have all kinds of swag and tickets to win to all of the hottest shows in town. 2 Bits, tasty food, craft beer, and games. Open Sunday through Wednesday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Thursday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 3 a.m. For more information, visit 2bitsnashville.com.
Down, put the gun down. I'm set fire to the whole damn house. Put it down, put it down, put it down, put it down.
Hey, it's ZZ Ward, and you're listening to Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee at the Tuned In Broadcasting Studios, this is Music Business Radio. David Hooper here, and I'm with Norbert Putnam. He's a record producer and musician. He's been on over 10,000 records, had a huge impact and contribution to the history of music. We've talked about you as a player. What we haven't talked about is production. How did you make the transition from player to being a music producer?
Well, there was a point when I quit. You know, David Briggs and I, who came up together from Muscle Shoals, okay? By 1970, we've been here 5 years, and David is now in the top 4 pianists. It's Floyd Kramer, Pig Robbins, and David Briggs, and 1 or 2 others. I'm now in the top 4 for bassists, and we're playing 600 record dates a year. We can't really do any better. And it's also gruesome work. I leave home at 8 in the morning. And if I have 3 sessions, I'm home by 10 in the evening. If I have 4, I'm home by 2 a.m. Wow. Of course, we're in our 20s, you see.
Right.
But David and I had decided by the time we were both 28 that we'd become famous songwriters. So we bought an old house over in Grand Avenue, 1802 Grand, for $35,000. We're going to put in a demo studio. David and I have dinner on Saturday nights, and we'd drink, and we'd have these dreams. And, if we wrote 2 or 3 songs a year, hell, we could live in the mountains and go down and get the mailbox money, and, and we'd not have to play for all these jerks that we play for all day. For every great artist you played for, there were a lot of really mediocre people. So we built this little demo studio. And there was a producer from New York named Elliot Mazer who was coming down. Elliot brought a bunch of the folkies into town. He brought Ian and Sylvia, Eric Anderson, who I later produced, and he brings Neil Young. But he comes to the demo studio in 1970. I love this house, he says. He had helped us produce Area Code 615 in the late 60s, which was a hybrid band of country rock. But Elliot came to the studio, and it's going to be a demo studio, a bunch of 4 tracks, right? And he goes, I'm going to do Linda Ronstadt next year. I would do her here. We said, but we don't have a 16 track. Why don't you put in real gear? I think this could be a very successful studio. So we went to dinner with Elliot that night, and David and I decided maybe Elliot's right, because he was saying, Nashville doesn't really have a pop rock sort of studio. You could be a little oasis over here. Mm-hmm. So what did we do? We went out and we borrowed $125,000 at the bank and put in an MPEG 16 track and outfitted the place as a real studio. Well, the first thing I do is produce A Night They Drove Old Dixie Down with Joan Baez, and it goes top 5, okay? Yeah. And then the next year, Elliot brings in Neil Young, who's in town for the Johnny Cash show, and they do Keep Me Searching for a Heart of Gold. And that was the biggest selling record in the world that year. You guys know that? Harvest was the album. And then the next year, Dobie Gray comes in and does Drift Away. Yeah. And so the Quad is a place now that's the oasis in Nashville for pop rock. Joe Walsh and the James Gang are in there. Grand Funk Railroad's in there. I came down one day, and I didn't know who was in the studio, and I meet this handsome young black kid at the coffee machine. I said, "You're Michael Jackson." "Yeah, who are you?" I said, "I own the studio, Michael." "Oh, well, I'm mixing this Jackson 5 Live album." He's 13 years old, and they're dropping him off and picking him up. He's actually calling the shots, okay? How
cool is that?
Oh, it was wonderful. And immediately he says, "Listen, I got Bill Schnee in from California to mix it." Oh, Bill's one of the greatest in the world. No one mixed more gold and platinum records than Bill Schnee. I said, "Well, I want to come in and say hello to Schnee." "Well, look, I think he's screwing it up." I said, "No, wait a second, Michael. This guy already had like 50 platinum albums as a mixer." He goes, "The bass isn't right." I said, "Well, look, maybe I won't come in." I didn't want to get in between Michael Jackson and Bill Schnee, okay? I said, "Look, I got to make some phone calls. Will you come back down in an hour?" I said, "Yes." I'm thinking I'll go upstairs and Schnee will fix this in the next hour, right? So I come sneaking down there. "Michael, will you come in and listen?" And I said, "So what do you think's wrong?" "He's not getting enough bass on the record." I thought, you obnoxious little 13-year-old brat. This is one of the great. So I go in and I sit down on the sofa with Michael, and Schnee's up there 20 feet away. My God, Michael's right. There's not enough. I said, "Michael, go out in the hall. Let me talk to Schneezy." Okay, so Michael goes, I got Bill. "Hey, Norbert." I said, "You haven't worked here before, have you?" "Oh, no, I haven't." I said, "Well, our room's a little odd." I said, "You got to get the bass up to the point you can feel it in your toes, and you got to check it back there on the sofa. Because if it's too puffy on the sofa, you got to take a little low bottom out. But if it's not right on the sofa, it's wrong." "Really?" he said. I said, "Yeah." I said, "Can I get you some coffee?" So an hour later, "Michael, he's got it. He's got it." Michael, "God, he's got it." Jackson was a very impressive young man. Everything he said was right on the money. Yeah. I think he was a great genius.
Yeah. Well, I think he was a lot like Elvis in that he was very sharp and borrowed from people, and he knew what was going on, and from dance moves to music and everything that he did.
Yeah.
Marketing.
He was absolutely brilliant. And a lot like Presley because he never got to go out and live a normal life, you see.
Oh, yeah. You're listening to Music Business Radio. I'm here with Norbert Putnam, a record producer and musician. And let's take it back to your very first big production, because I think this is a really fantastic story. I know Clive Davis was involved, and that's always a good story, right?
Clive was fantastic. He was one of the great old record men, you know. I'm playing sessions, and I meet this this guy was working on the cleanup staff at Columbia Studios. He comes over one day. He goes, you're Norbert, aren't you? I said, yeah. He goes, my name's Kris, and I'm going to help Charlie here. You want me to clean that ashtray? I said, Kris, I don't smoke. Oh, okay, well, if you need anything, I'm here. Well, Kris was this guy. He had tattered old boots and black jeans and black T-shirt. He never wore anything else, okay? He looked homeless to me, And there wasn't anything that would have led me to believe that this man could have been a Rhodes Scholar or could have even seen Oxford, England, okay? But over the months, and 2 or 3 months go by, and he'd come over and we'd chat a little bit, and I felt sorry for the guy, I wanted to buy him some clothes, okay? Then one day he says, could you have a beer with me at 5 o'clock? I thought, well, sure, I'm going to buy him a beer, you see. And so we went over to Ireland's, and he said, could you perhaps help me do some demos? I'm actually a songwriter. Oh, God, so I've been led astray. See, I wouldn't even have gone to have everybody in Nashville was a songwriter. But I liked this guy, and I said, so what? He said, I can't pay you, but you think you could get Briggs and Kerrigan? Now, Scotty Moore is going to give me 2 hours over there at Music City Recorder. Scotty likes my stuff. I thought, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, I talked to the boys, and they finally agreed that they'd give him 2 hours for free on a Saturday morning. We went into Scotty Moore's place. He comes in at 10 a.m., and he's obviously very nervous, this Kris Kristofferson guy, and he opens his guitar case and takes out a pint. I want to think it was Southern Comfort. It was something really obnoxious. And he turned around and says, now, I know you fellas play with all the big guys, and I'm a little nervous, so I'm going to have a little of this. And he went, I knew he'd had a drink before. This is no amateur drinker, okay? And then he turned around and said, hey, Put, you want... I said, no, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, Kris. Well, let's just get into this. Now, we've got our little legal pad. So he gets his guitar out, and he starts playing a very standard sort of country progression, and he's mumbling the lyrics so softly. We can't hear any of the words, okay? But we get the changes down, and Scotty says, everybody on the mic, and we don't have headphones, so he gets on the mic, and we still can't hear what the heck he's saying. And we do a take, and we come in, and they play it back. And Briggs is standing there next to me. And Kris starts singing. And David punches me. He goes, this guy's worse than Dylan. Well, Bob opened that door, didn't he, And then it got into the chorus. And David and I are looking at each other. Lyrics not bad. Lyrics pretty good. Take the ribbon from your hair and lose nightfall. I think we did 2-3 standards that morning, okay? Right? That guy can write. This guy can actually write, okay? Well, okay, Kris takes that, gets his publishing deal. A couple of years later, we're making records with Kris. I'm playing on his first records. And Joan Baez is in town, and I usually played second bass. If she was doing folk music, Junior Husky would play the upright. If it rocked, they'd send me in. And Kris says, you don't think you can introduce me to Joan Baez, do you? I said, well, I think I can if I can get you past security. Joni was marching in those days with Martin Luther King. This wasn't good in the South. We had armed security guards at CBS Studios. There were certain people that would put a bullet in Joan Baez, okay? But at the end of that week, during the playback, I went out and got Kris and brought him in, introduced him to Joni. 6 months later, my phone rings, and it's Joan Baez. Norbert, she says, I'm coming back to Nashville to make another record, but I want you to lead the band this time. Grady Martin had always been her leader for the folk music. She said, I want to try to make a hit record. I want you to get some of your Muscle Shoals buddies, some of your Memphis buddies, and let's see if we can rock this thing up a little bit. I said, great. I said, I've just built a studio with David Briggs. Would you come to our studio? Well, sure, she says. We have a big act coming to our studio. This is incredible. I said, no, will Maynard Solomon produce the record as always? Oh, no, Kris is going to do it. Oh, I thought Kris will produce. Well, things are even better, aren't they? So I booked this great band, and we go down to Quadraphonic Studio. We're going to start on a Monday, go 5 days, 2 to 5, 6 to 9, 10 to 1 a.m. We've got 15 sessions. It's going to be a double record set with 24 songs. I called Charlie McCoy. Charlie said, you're booking me for 15 sessions to do 24 songs? We normally do 4 songs in 3 hours. What are we going to do with all the downtime? I said, well, Charlie, I'm not going to push you. But to make a long story short, I come down to the studio at 1:45, And Kris is back by the coffee machine. He doesn't look well, okay? And he's holding onto a bottle of something that strangely looks like alcohol. And he's sort of wedged in the corner, and he's not moving. And I walked back. I said, Kris, are you okay? No. I said, well, look, we need to get some coffee in you. We're starting in 15 minutes. I'm not producing a record. So I'm thinking, whole thing's going to collapse, right? It's about to collapse. I said, no, you can produce the record. We'll help you produce the record. I've been talking to Joni, and I think you should produce the record. I'm thinking about this carefully. I said, where is Joni? She's up in your office. I ran upstairs. I bolt through there. Joni, have you seen Kris? Norbert, Kris is drunk. Can you help me do the record? Well, Kris later admitted that he was a little inhibited by all the gear and all the equipment, and he said, I don't know anything about that, and sure, I had a cocktail too early. The other thing, she said, you could plug your bass in the desk, and you could play and listen. I often thought she might have chosen David Briggs if they could have gotten the piano in there. So, it's the way life works out, isn't it? So I plug my bass in, and we start, and she's chosen all the songs, and it's a great collection of her favorite writers. There's a Beatles song, a Rolling Stones song. Robbie Robertson of the band has a song called The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. And on the third night, we get to that. And, of course, a couple of months later, the record comes out, and that song makes the top 5, sells 1.5 million copies. Joan Baez had never sold more than 100,000 albums. The album's at 1.5 million, and it's a double record set. Clive Davis calls me. And now my life is about to change. And
I'm going to stop you right there because this is going to be a good story, I can tell, and I want to make sure we've got enough time for it. So when we come back, I'm going to have you talk about producing Joan Baez, working with Clive Davis, Dan Fogelberg. That's next on Music Business Radio.
I love you when you're singing that song, and I got a lump in my throat 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong.
Hi, this is Vance Joy, and you're listening to Music Business Radio.
Dr. Martin Luther King said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?
To commemorate Martin Luther King Day, Hands On Nashville invites you to volunteer on Saturday, January 18th and Monday, January 20th for Protecting and Serving Our Neighbors, an event presented by Regions Bank that benefits Metro Parks. As a volunteer, you'll help improve our city's community centers through painting projects. The Nashville Fire Department will also be on hand to share fire prevention tips. Learn more and register at HON.org.
Hey, this is Ricky from the Wild Feathers. You're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
From Nashville, Tennessee, it's Music Business Radio. My guest today, Norbert Putnam, record producer and musician. He's played on over 10,000 records. And what happened next? Clive Davis called you.
Yes, Clive calls. Excuse me. My phone rings one day. My secretary says, Clive Davis, president of Columbia Records, biggest label in America. So I go, Norbert, it's Clive Davis. I want you to fly up here. I need to talk to you. I said, well, sure. He goes, I'm sending plane tickets. I'll have a room for you at the Plaza. I want you to come up to the Black Rock. I want you to produce for Columbia. Wow. I'm impressed, okay? So the next week, I fly into New York. A big, long limo picks me up, takes me to the Black Rock, and I go up to the 13th floor. And I walk into Mr. Davis's incredible office. It's with a wall of glass. It surveys Manhattan. And he sets me down. He said, Norbert Putnam, you are a great genius. Well, that'll make you nervous, right? So I'm thinking, where's this going? He says, do you realize that Joan Baez, in a 10-year career, has never sold more than 100,000 albums? She's released 10 albums. And she is the queen of folkdom. But you've just taken her into the top 5 with a single and sold 1.5 million. You know something about this folk music. Oh, folk music, I said. Well, folk music was not my favorite music, okay? You know, it was the R&B music of Muscle Shoals. Their horns going, da-da-da-da-da, and I said, well, Clive, I said, I'm from Muscle Shoals. Do you know I'm from Muscle Shoals? Oh, yes. I said, well, I would really rather do R&B music with horn bands, and great bass lines. Well, there was a silence, and Clive says, I have somebody to do that. I've just signed Gamble and Huff and Tom Bell. Boy, those guys are good. I knew I was dead, okay? I said, so exactly what did you have in mind, Mr. Davis? He said, well, you know something about this folk music, and I got this kid from Peoria. His name is Dan Fogelberg. Dan Fogelberg. What an interesting name, I thought. And he slid a tape across his desk. It was one of those old 7-inch reels, you know. And if Clive could tell, I wasn't too excited about producing a lot of folk music. And so he changed his whole tactic. I think he intended to play me some tracks by Dan Fogelberg. But he can see, he said, Norbert, he says, here's the deal. He goes, I want you to just take this home and listen to it. This kid can write, he can sing, he can play, and he's only 19 years old. I think he's a great genius, and I'd like you to consider working with him. And if you will, and he pointed his finger at me across the desk, I will make you a very, very, very wealthy young man. I sold out instantly, okay. I took the tape home. I like the sound of that last very, you know what I'm saying? So I took the tape home, and I put it on a few days later. Dan Fogelberg was great. At the age of 19, he was writing mature songs with great melodies. Harmonies were fantastic. So I called up Clive, and I said, Clive, you're right. This guy's incredible. You'll do it then. I said, absolutely. Norbert, I'll give you whatever you want. Tell me what you need. Now, just don't tell Billy Sherrill. Now, Billy Sherrill is producing his country records. Billy Sherrill had a budget of $20,000 to do a George Jones album. Clive gives me $75,000, okay? He wants a pop record. He doesn't want a country record. And he wanted me to spend time on it. So, sure enough, I go in with young Dan Fogelberg, and he's got some good songs, some songs not. I didn't think we had a single on that first record. I remember saying to him, you must have more songs. No, I've only got 12 songs. He lied to me. He'd already written the first 3 albums. He admits to me years later, he said, I didn't want to play you the songs on the second or third album because I knew you'd throw songs off the first record. And I had to get these songs done. So we make this record. It had some beautiful music, and it opens with To the Morning, a piano suite sort of thing. And I used a chord out of Copland's Appalachian Spring. You hear the strings come up in the background as the piano. So we'd make this very artistic record. I send it to Clyde. He hates the record. He calls me up and he goes, I hate the record. You know what that means? There'll be no promotion of the record. I said, well, Clive, this is the reading of the kid. I think this kid's going to be great. Yeah, but I want it to rock and roll more, Norbert. You know, it just doesn't rock and roll enough. I said, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to put it out, but I don't know. I may drop this kid, you know. All right, they put the record out. And Bonnie Garner calls me. She's Clive's one of his assistants in New York. She says, Norbert, would you fly to me to Cambridge? We want to see how Dan performs. He's playing Passim's, a little coffee house in Cambridge. He came out and he hid behind the piano. Had an upright piano, okay? And all I can see is the top of his head. And I said, Bonnie, this guy will never get anywhere, you know? And I only had 7 or 8 people. So months go by, and Dan's calling me from the road. Well, I had 12 people in Atlanta last night. Oh, that's really good, Dan. And then he calls, I'm in Sarasota. We had 14. Oh, things are really looking up, right? And then one night, the phone rings. Norbert, I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. There are 2,000 people here. I said, where did we go right? There's a radio station playing our album. And guess what? A local jock had found this album. And he was playing the first night he played the whole thing. And then people's phones start coming in. So we called Clive. Clive's still not convinced, okay? Irving comes in. Irving Azoff's his manager. So Irving comes in and manages to get Clive to release Dan Fogelberg. He then takes the elevator down 2 floors to Epic, okay? And Don, what's Don's name? I can't think of the guy's name. Don, somebody ran Epic, signs Dan Fogelberg. 5 years later, we've got 3 platinum albums with Phoenix and Netherlands, and Fogelberg has become the romantic balladeer that all the little girls love, you know, and all the men hate, okay? I was in a bar one night in Hilton, had a guy comes over and goes, you produce that Fogelberg stuff? I said, yeah. You like it? No, I hate it, but if I've got a girl coming over, that's what I'm playing.
So within an hour, he lost his record deal and got a newer, better record deal. And you guys had some hit records. Norbert Putnam is my guest today. He's a record producer and musician. He's been on over 10,000 albums. One of them Margaritaville, you produced that. Jimmy Buffett. So before we go, because we're running out of time, by the way, you've got a new book out. It's called Music Lessons, so a lot more stories than this. 10,000 records, that's a lot. But Margaritaville is one that we cannot pass up here from Music Business Radio. What's the story behind that?
Buffett had come to Nashville. You know, he went to Southern Miss and he studied journalism. The first time I met him, he came into Quad Studios. We were recording Jerry Jeff Walker, and Jimmy came over to try to get an interview for Billboard magazine. He was a freelance writer for Billboard. And Buzz Cason signed him and did 3 or 4 records with him. And then Don Gant, one of my favorite producers, gets him, and they make a deal, I think, with ABC Paramount, the first major label deal. And Don produces the song Come Monday. And it's his first big radio record. It makes the top 20. Sold about 120,000 records. But Jimmy and Don sort of get into an argument because Jimmy wants to use his road band, the fabulous Coral Reefer Band, okay? And they were Coral Reefers. And Don said, well, I'm not working with you if you're going to use your road band because they can't play well enough, you know? And suddenly I get a phone call. I don't know if it was Don Light or the record label called me. And I said, would you take a meeting with Jimmy Buffett? I met with Buffett, and I said, well, tell me about the Coral Reefers. He says, well, you've heard Come Monday, right? I said, yeah, and it's a nice record, really nice record. He goes, well, the Coral Reefers are more like the Rolling Stones in a Nashville studio band. I remember sitting there, we were at Julian's restaurant, and I was drinking a glass of wine. And I was trying to imagine the Rolling Stones doing Come Monday. It wasn't. It did not equate, okay? And I said, well, Jimmy, play me some songs. Well, I'll come over tomorrow. So the next day I go over, gets his guitar out, and he starts. And his style is like a country singer or a folk singer, but all the songs are about the ocean. They're about sailing, drinking, islands. His grandfather had been a ship's captain on a cruise ship in the Caribbean, okay? And he said, well, so what do you think? I said, well, I think we get out of Nashville. Okay. He goes, really? You go in a studio here? I said, well, you know, I do Dan Fogelberg in the mountains of Colorado. We had just done Netherlands at Jim Guercio's Caribou Ranch. The reason for that was Dan lived 10 miles away in a log cabin up at the 9,000-foot level. And he wrote those songs there, and when we recorded them there, everything came from his heart. And I said, your songs are about the ocean. Let's go to Miami. I'll book Criteria Studios, which was hot as a pistol. Clapton was cutting hits there. The Bee Gees were there. And Jimmy's just bought his first sailboat. We can go sailing every day. We'll work from 9 to 5. We'll go sailing, listen to the day's work, and try to make something that's, I think the term I used with Jimmy, we need to invent Caribbean rock. We'll take some steel drums from Trinidad. We'll take ship's bells clanging, and I said, but I know this is all cliche. Trust me, Buffett, I'll think of something better. I never thought of anything better. And it worked. So we get to Miami, okay? And he's got some good songs. We've got a Jesse Winchester song, Down Around Biloxi. We've got a Steve Goodman song, Banana Republic, okay? And Jimmy's got some pretty darn good songs. So we get down there, and I bring in a couple of ringers, because I figure if I'm going to have any trouble, it'll be the drummer. So I bring the great Kenny Buttrey down to play percussion, realizing if the drummer stumbles, we'll throw Buttrey in, right? And Teddy Irwin from New York came down, and if the guitar player stumbles, Teddy could do anything, right? So we start. And guess what? Jimmy's band plays great, okay? Well, they've been rehearsing the songs they've been playing on the road. And so we're just, things are really looking good. We work 11 to 5, and we get 2 tracks. We do a rough mix, get a cassette. We jump in our Chrysler Rent a convertible. We drive down to the Coconut Grove Marina. Jimmy's just gotten his first boat, a 33-foot Charlie Catch. So we crank up the diesel, we motor her out, pull her into the wind, open a couple of Budweisers, and crank it up downstairs. And the first thing we noticed was the sound of the bow going into the waves. It rises and rises and rises. I said, that's the tempo of the record. We need to make music for sailboats. Oh, yeah, that's what we'll do. Have another beer. Well, so we think we're on to something, right? We don't know what we're doing. So about 3 days into it, he says, I started another song. I said, really? What's it called? Well, I think I'm going to call it Margaritaville. I instantly hated the title because in those days, it was sort of a cliche. Well, the studio that Motown had in Detroit was called Hitsville. Henry Mancini wrote a beautiful ballad called Dreamsville. I'm thinking, surely you could come up with a better name than Margaritaville, right? So I'm thinking, I pray to God he doesn't finish that song. So anyway, we're working, and you know, I'm describing a song that I think Forbes magazine said has generated more money than any song in the history. So am I a great genius as a record producer? See what a great genius I am, right?
Can't win them all.
So anyway, we're almost finished. We're 2 days from finishing. And Jimmy walks in. He goes, I finished that song. I'd forgotten it. What song? Margaritaville. Oh God! I said, oh well, good. He goes, and he's putting it. He's got his legal pad, and he's putting it on a music stand. He's sitting down there, handing him a guitar, and we all gather around. Okay, and I take a deep breath. I'm going to be positive. I don't care how bad it is. Right? And he starts diddling on sponge cake, watching the sun bake. All those tourists covered in oil, and me and my 6-string on our front porch swing. Smell those shrimp beginning to boil. My God, he's paying the most beautiful scenario for a short film ever, isn't he, this guy? I'm spellbound. It's one of the greatest songs I've ever heard. And you know, he studied journalism, right? And you know what the most important aspect of every song is, don't you? Conflict. If you don't have conflict, you can't write a song. It's a beautiful day and I love you and it's still a beautiful day. That's not an interest. And so, as he gets into this thing, we get into the chorus, and he sings, I'm wasting away again in Margaritaville, searching for my lost shaker of salt. Some people claim there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault. Okay, he's brought in the reason he's there. He's running away, right? But then what does he do? He accepts responsibility. The humility. Now I want to give him a hug. It's one of the greatest lyrics ever written, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, it sells.
Well, it definitely paints the picture. I think you were right about
that. I don't think he ever wrote a better song.
Yeah. Norbert, if there's anybody who can tell a story as good as Jimmy Buffett, it's you. I appreciate you being here, and we simply don't have enough time. The good thing is you've got a book, and the book is called Music Lessons, Norbert Putnam. Norbert, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. I'll see you next week when I'll interview another industry guest.
Thanks for listening to Music Business Radio, a production of Tuned In Broadcasting Incorporated, Nashville, Tennessee. Recorded in the WRLT Lightning 100 studios. Music Business Radio is produced by Gary Crane, David Hooper, and Dan Buckley. Special technical assistance by Tom Hansen. With Pro Tools post-production by Justin Hamill and Dan Buckley. And Lester said, the train leaves in 5 minutes. For information on syndication, guest booking, demo derby music, or downloading previous episodes, visit musicbusinessradio.com.
Music Business Radio.